If you're taking on the role of being a director, you've signed up for a big task.
Making sure companies are paying for performance is the biggest challenge facing compensation committees today.
Corporate Board Member presents the Board Governance Series, with series contributors PricewaterhouseCoopers and Meridian Compensation Partners. On this edition of the Board Governance Series, 4 principles of a sound compensation philosophy, with Gerard Leider, partner, Meridian Compensation Partners, an independent compensation committee consulting practice spinoff from Hewitt Associates.
Hi, I'm Laura Finn, web editor of boardmember.com. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Board Governance Series. I have with me today Gerard Leider, partner and senior consultant at Meridian Compensation Partners. Gerard, thanks for being here to talk about compensation philosophies today.
Thank you for the invitation. Look forward to our conversation today.
Could you start by explaining how companies state and establish their compensation philosophy?
Not a problem. If you think about the compensation philosophy, the objective of that is really to act as your blueprint. As a comp committee, as a board, how do you set and establish pay? In essence, it basically acts as this blueprint for helping set not only the levels, but how you benchmark, in essence, how you basically derive your compensation amounts and programs.
Now, there's a belief that some boards overpay executives by paying above the 50th percentile. What is your position on that?
Well, what does it take to get the right talent? I think at the end of the day, my position on this is I encourage our clients to make what I call an educated, informed decision. In doing that, we instill the basics around the business judgment rule. So as long as they're informed and what the differences are between the 50th and 70th percentile, we don't have an issue. So for example, Laura, if you think about it, there's a delta difference. If you look at base salary and look at broad market comparisons, in general industry, you'd be roughly about a 10 to 15% premium when you go from 50th to 75th percentile in base pay. When you go into incentive pay, that premium magnifies. For example, when you look at long-term incentives, you're going to see a premium of 35 to 45% when you look at the 50th percentile versus the 75th percentile. So it's pretty significant. There needs to be a tie back relative to not only just the pay objectives, but how you set your goals. In essence, are you setting benchmark expectations at target and paying opportunities at the 50th percentile versus setting target at 75th percentile and meeting those expectations?
What are the critical parts that need to be included in a compensation philosophy?
What you're going to find, there's a couple major parts. First is, what are our pay objectives? So are we targeting the 50th percentile? Are we targeting something larger or smaller than that? And define that by component of pay. What you'll see is you want to tie back to your business strategy. What are you trying to accomplish as a business? And your comp philosophy is there to support that business strategy. So in essence, you'll find organizations that are trying to preserve cash may be more conservative on fixed pay, i.e. base salary, and more leveraged on incentive pay. So when you look at a good, solid comp philosophy, you look at things like what are we trying to target in terms of pay objectives, who do we want to benchmark against, and balancing those and setting those pay levels appropriately.
Now, you talked about pay objectives and targeting pay. What is common market practice for those?
Laura, if you look at the Fortune 1000, the most common practices are as follows. Base salary usually is set around the 50th percentile. I think you'll find roughly about 80% of the Fortune 1000 set base pay at the 50th percentile. The balance will be split between setting base salaries greater than 50th percentile. Roughly about 5% of the Fortune 1000 will establish market-based salaries below the 50th percentile. Again, it's a unique situation, but it goes back to what their business strategy and affordability question is. As you look at incentive pay, you'll see those percentages change. For example, again, looking at the Fortune 1000, you'll see that roughly about 60% of organizations will target long-term incentives at the 50th percentile. Now, this has changed dramatically in the last couple of years. In general, you've seen the market become a little more conservative. If you look 5 years ago, you would see a greater percentage of organizations targeting incentive pay above the 50th percentile. Today, as I alluded to, about 2/3 of the organizations basically establish a target bonus and or long-term incentives at the 50th percentile. The balance will target incentives in that upper quartile.
How do you help clients establish the right peer group?
That's a very tricky question, and I think you're going to get different answers and different perspectives. But it all goes back to, in my mind, where do you compete for your executive talent? Where do you basically attract talent from? Where do you lose talent to? Organizations will also look at industry peers. But in my mind, it goes beyond just industry peers. As you look at general roles and expectations of your incumbents, you'll go much broader than that. So if you think about it in terms of the ideal peer group, you start looking at organizations that are within your industry. So you may look at other organizations within your SIC or GICS code. From there, you'll basically ask questions like, where do I recruit talent from? That may be on a geographic basis, it may be on a national basis. But in essence, what type of skill sets do I need? You'll see certain roles will be industry specific. Other roles will be more broader in nature. In essence, at the end of the day, it's going to be an issue of data availability. As you look at jobs, you'll go beyond just your named proxy officers, so you'll be needing to use private sources. So in essence, it becomes a balance between data availability and how you benchmark against that broader market.
Gerard, you've worked with boards and management teams for over 15 years, so do you have any rules of thumb or tips that you'd like to share?
It comes down to some basic principles. At the end of the day, I like my clients to make sure they make an educated, informed decision. Data isn't always the answer. Data is some place to basically start and make that informed decision. There are basic rules of thumb out there as you look at market values and setting market pay levels. For example, the majority of market uses regressed market values, and it's usually strongly correlated to revenues. Well, a basic rule of thumb that I use a lot with my clients, if you double in revenue size, you see a 10 to 15% in base salary. That's just a simple example.
It's really interesting. Thank you so much, Gerard, for sharing this information with us.
Appreciate your time. Thanks.
And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Board Governance Series.
Gerard Leider can be reached at gleider@meridiancp.com. The Board Governance Series is a presentation of corporate board member in NYSE Euronext Company.